And it was a fantastically valuable lesson. And as with all language, learning it changes the way that one thinks. When we use the pronoun we, when we're talking about the planet's future, what's the constituency? Who is included? Can we still legitimately stick exclusively with our own species when we say we? Similarities with post-colonial and post-feminist discourse, I think, again, sort of into view. Another example of the way that the syntax of language locks us into a particular way of thinking about the world, I came across when I was doing my last book, Beachcombings. And this was I tracked the nuances and use of the verb to grow in connection with woodlands. And you find up until the 1650s that the word grow, with respect to a wood or a tree, is always intransitive. Trees grew, full stop, and we took what we wanted from them. After the invention of plantation forestry, from about 1650 onwards, you see the word grow becoming a transitive verb. We are the subject and trees are the object. We are actually seeing ourselves as responsible for their presence on the earth. We put them in the ground. They are ours. And I guess one could track very many similar words, particularly at that time in history when the transition between subject and object, rather than a holistic subject, was becoming very much more pronounced. The great American biologist Lewis Thomas believed this grammatical structure of the object-subject relationship between human and nature was inevitable. And he wrote in his famous essay, Natural Man, "It's a despairing prospect. Here we are, filled to exuberance with our new understanding of kinship to all the family of life, and here we are, still 19th century man, walking bootshod over the open face of nature, subjugating and civilizing it. And we cannot stop this controlling unless we vanish under the hill ourselves. We developed this way, we grew this way, we are this kind of creature." Thomas later wasn't so sure what he said there, and he developed a new idea of the human position in this, sort of midway between the two, where he talked about humans becoming handymen to the earth, handy persons to the earth. Sometime after I'd read Thomas, I found Aldo Leopold's book, Sand County Almanac, and in that there is a provocatively, excitingly entitled essay called Thinking Like a Mountain. It's only about 3 pages long. And before I actually read it, I thought this was entirely wonderful as a title. The notion of this act of empathy, to see the mountain not as we see it, but as the mountain sees itself. Superficially, the essay isn't quite that. It's about the importance of wolves to the mountain ecosystem by a man who had himself, 20 years earlier, shot wolves because he thought that would mean more deer. But its implication, I think, is more than that. He talks here about the wolf's call. Every living thing pays heed to that call. To the deer, it's the reminder of the way of all flesh. To the pine, the forecaster of midnight scuffles and of blood on the snow. To the coyote, a promise of gleanings to come. To the cowman, a threat of red ink at the bank. To the hunter, a challenge of fang against bullet. Yet behind these obvious and immediate hopes and fears, there lies a deeper meaning, known only to the mountain itself. Only the mountain has lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of the wolf. The mountain may think, but it doesn't speak or write. And I wonder if that might be the modern role of the writer about nature, to be its advocate, its amanuensis, to put into words what it would say if it could. I accept this is philosophical nonsense at one level, as humans using human thought processes and language can only ever express human perspectives, human framings. But I don't think that excuses us from the work of imaginative sympathy. The advent of post-colonial writing doesn't mean that the one-time colonialist is forbidden to write about his ex-colony, but that there are now requirements for a new empathy and respect. Returning to the East Anglian landscape, we have a long tradition of colonial landscape and nature writing here. The stereotype of East Anglia is that it is bleak, melancholy, wasted, a thing which echoes perhaps the extreme manipulation of the land itself here. Suffolk's 18th century poet George Crabbe, I think, must take part of the blame for this distorting cast. Crabbe was a very good botanist, though not a patch on his contemporary John Clare, and gave vivid portrayals of the hermit vegetation of the Suffolk coast. But he saw their meagre proportions and miserly habits as symbols of the ineluctable human poverty of the Suffolk coast. Nature is painted as if it were an expression of personal mood. In a famous passage in Peter Grimes, the whole carnival of Suffolk's coastal wildlife, eels, crabs, bitterns, the tuneless cry of fishing gull or clanging golden eye, all of it, to Grimes' downcast mind, oppressed the soul with misery, grief and fear. He called it a sad splendour and didn't see that survival in these vast soils was a kind of triumph, not a last-ditch stand. Ian Forster, it was quite rich what he has to say, coming from another misanthrope, wrote about Crabbe, the idea of regeneration, so congenial to Wordsworth and the Lake District, does not appeal to this son of the estuary. The convention of viewing the flatlands as melancholy wasteland continued, and its modern exponent, though I say this with trepidation, in this particular university is W.G. Sebald in The Rings of Saturn. His hypnotic odyssey around the Suffolk coast is evocative, and it's playing with ideas of memory and the synchronicity of history. But as a book about place or habitat, it is firmly in the colonial tradition. The landscape's taken hostage, appropriated to Sebald's other melancholy purposes. He has panic attacks in every open space, every natural open space, marshland, shingle beach. Even the heather in full bloom at Dunwich disorientated him. He was numbed by this crazed flowering, the low leaden sky, the sickly violet hue of the heath clouding the eye, the silence. All this became oppressive. And interestingly, he uses exactly the same verb as Crabbe, and unnerving. I suppose Sebald may have had clinical agoraphobia, but the end result is the independence, the vitality, the true history of the landscape and its inhabitants is disregarded. And I have to say, this isn't just a matter contained inside literature. There are political consequences to this. The long stereotyping of the landscapes of coastal and sandy East Anglia as waste, by 100 writers less distinguished than Crabbe and Sebald, is one reason why Norfolk common land suffered the most extensive enclosure of common land in any county in England, and why in the 20th century they've been the dumping ground of conifer forests and military bases.